This podcast is sponsored by Boveda Humidity Packs. Boveda packs are meant to be stored with your cannabis flower. This helps control the relative humidity inside your jar, which is going to control the cannabinoid and terpene profile of your flower over time, so you'll never have to experience dry, crusty nugs. You may have seen Boveda packs in the weed bags you buy from the dispensary with your flower, but you can also purchase these for your home use. I highly encourage that you do, especially if you buy your flower in bulk. The packs come in a variety of sizes depending on how much bud you have at home. They are incredibly useful and affordable, and I noticed a huge difference when I started using these, and now I could never go back. I also want to note that every single Boveda employee that I have spoken with has been incredibly happy working at this company, and I have so much respect for them for being an ethical employer and helping fund education like this podcast. If you want to purchase some Boveda packs, the links will be available in the show notes of this episode. Welcome back to Bioactive. I'm your host, Riley Kirk. This episode, we're talking about elderberry, or Sambucus nigra. Elderberry and elderflower have a long history in cultures all over the world and continue to be one of the most used medicinal plants. Elderberry is best known for shortening the duration of colds and flus and has been shown in multiple human trials to do so. However, the trials were all pretty limited in the number of participants, and this has not yet been studied for children. However, pairing the current evidence we have with some of the awesome phytochemistry of this plant, it makes sense to me why this is such a popular supplement. The main beneficial compounds are the flavonoids of this plant that give it that beautiful purple and blue color. Like many berries, it can provide a robust source of antioxidants and anti-inflammatory benefits. It also contains appreciable levels of both vitamin A and vitamin C. Beyond colds and flus, elderberry is revered for its antiviral, antibiotic, and anti-cancer properties. Elderflowers were also reported to be protective against the sun's UV rays, among other uses similar to the berries for colds and flus. Before we dive into this episode, a very important safety note: the leaves, bark, and even the berries produce some toxic compounds that contain cyanide. These can be easily remediated by introducing heat, as you do during the preparation process for jams, syrups, and many salves and other products. It is not recommended to eat the berries raw, as they do contain low levels of these compounds, and other parts of the plant especially contain even more of these potentially harmful compounds. Some other safety notes: make sure to talk to your doctor if you're on other medications like immunosuppressant medications and blood pressure medications. Today's guest is my husband, Jake, and today's actually our 2-year anniversary. So today we went out and went mushroom hunting, collected some elderberries, and then had some sushi, and of course recorded this podcast. Jake is a wildlife biologist, and we do a ton of foraging together, among the many other outdoor activities that we love doing. He is an expert in understanding the landscape and the different ecotones that plants, fungi, and animals thrive in. Jake will very likely be a regular guest on the podcast because I love talking to him. This is my husband, Jake, who is a wildlife biologist, and we are going to talk about one of our favorite things to forage for, which is this plant right here called elderberry. So we're going to talk all about elderberry today, not just about the medicinal and bioactive components, but also how to find it, which can be one of the most difficult things, and that's why Jake's here. Hey, Jake.
Glad to be here, guys.
Okay, cool. So this is going to be super conversational, not super sciencey, but a huge obstacle in beginning to forage is trying to find the plant or fungus or whatever that you're trying to find. So what we usually do is first we learn about, like, if we were finding a mushroom, like what kind of tree does that mushroom like to be on? Or if we're looking for a plant, you just do a little bit of research on the internet. What kind of environment is that plant going to be around? So for instance, for elderberry, we often find it likes to get its toesies wet. It likes to be in pretty moist, rich soils, for sure.
Right, and so that's where we usually start. We usually
yeah.
start with wet areas and disturbed areas. So disturbed areas like the sides of roads, this is one of those plants that roadside ditches can be your best friend when you're trying to find them. But looking for areas that are moist, disturbed, and so if we're near kind of infrastructure, we can often find them on the side of the roads. But if we're looking to, go on that adventure, go on a foraging trip, spend some time in the woods for the day, we will tailor our search to wet areas that have been disturbed. And there's one animal that lives in the woods here that's really good at doing that, and that's the beaver. So we often are looking for elderberry at abandoned beaver ponds. And
I will say though, as far as disturbed, like my drive down I-95 South, I used to see elderberry like covering the side of the highway. It was everywhere, and obviously that's a really difficult spot to just pull over and pick a few berries, so that's really difficult. But if you don't live around like the wilderness, the side of roads just is a fantastic place to start. And well, also, I think we can say this now, like it can be really difficult to find elderberries at this time of year as we're like approaching fall, because the berries are dark in color. They're really like a rich, almost black when they're fully ripe. And that can kind of blend into the landscape really easily. So if you know you want to find elderberries the upcoming year, start scouting for berries in the spring. Because elderberry flowers are bright white, and they're these kind of like flats of flowers, and they kind of really stick out, paired with the compound leaf, which we'll show a picture of. But the big white flowers can be such a good indicator of like you're just driving down the road and you say, oh, I see elderberry flowers, mark it on your map or whatever, and then come back to that later.
It's flowering at a really distinct time of year. So you think of your spring flowers, you think of your apple blossoms, or wherever you may live, these other things that really stick out in the springtime. Well, once all those have gone by, then your elderberry comes out. So here, we're in northern New Hampshire. That tends to be the last week of June, the first week of July. So often July 4th weekend, whenever we're traveling somewhere, it'll really stick out.
Elderberry.
And we've learned the hard way that marking them on the GPS is key. Or however it may be. It could be, a street sign marker. Oh, go up, Elm Street and
just in your notes app, just like
next to the telephone pole, because they will disappear. Back to what Riley was saying, when these become a nice, luscious berry, it's in the fall time. It's right now. So we're in the first week of September. Last week of August is when we start to see elderberries ripen around here. All of the leaves in your forest are kind of hardening off. They're all that green, that really bright springtime green is gone.
Everything kind of looks similar when you're just driving by.
And they blend into the shadows. And so we've had springs where we're like, man, can't wait for this fall. We're gonna do so great. We've got all these elderberry plants, and then the fall comes and we're like, wait, where exactly was that again? So be diligent about taking notes, and you'd be amazed what one or two plants can produce. Like a patch of elderberry can produce a pound or more.
We just harvested some, what was it, last week? A bit south from us, so those plants were ready a little earlier, but we harvested, what was it, 1 or 2 pounds?
It was it was about 1.5 pounds.
And we were like on our way somewhere and we just clipped like as many as we could. So we should also talk about harvesting technique in general. There's a lot to talk about, but while we're on the topic. So the elderberries kind of come on a like flattened stalk like this. This one's kind of, you have a better example there. But essentially what we do is we don't use the leaves. We don't utilize the leaves because they actually have some compounds in them that contain a cyanide derivative, a glycoside of cyanide. So we really don't want to be harvesting too many of the leaves because they may have some medicinal benefits, but the risks outweigh the benefits in my opinion as far as the leaves and the bark go. So we're really just after this cluster of berries, unless you want to harvest the elder flowers in the spring, because the flowers also have a bunch of great medicinal benefits. But we just harvest the top here and we just clip it and then we put it in a bag and then we bring it home. And then again, because the stems and the leaves have some compounds you don't necessarily want to ingest, when you get home, you have to remove all the berries by just moving your fingers like this and separating them from the stalk. And then you'll have a big pile of these beautiful, beautiful purple berries. Just another friendly reminder, the berries also produce low levels of these toxic compounds, and the green ones have even more. So you definitely want to separate the green berries from the very ripe black to dark purple berries. Don't consume the green ones. Make sure you cook down or introduce heat to those berries before consuming them.
Riley's making that look pretty easy, but this is a time-consuming process. So just be prepared when you get this home, because they're really easy to pick off the bush and they're really easy to get a lot of, but it's important to take the time and kind of roll them off. And we like to put on a program or something and just kind of, that's our veg out, and just roll elderberries.
Yeah, no, it's good. And you want to avoid, like, these ones are a little bit unripe, actually. The green ones, you don't want to be ingesting those. So you really want to target these beautiful purple berries.
And it can be tough. You know, we have some of these that have some green berries, and we will pick these out, but these are at a point where 3/4 of the berries on the stalk are ripe or ready to be picked. Some of them aren't, but you give it 2 or 3 days and you're competing with the natives who are eating this, which is a lot of your neotropical songbirds or your migrating little Tweety birds.
Birds love elderberries.
And really everything does. You know, you'll see a patch of elderberry that's almost ripe and all the big stems are sticking up straight, and you'll come by the next day to harvest it and it's been just demolished by a black bear.
I saw bear tracks a couple times ago that we harvested. I saw a huge area where a bear had been through. And I was like, good for you, man.
Yeah, exactly. we're competing with the, you know, everybody loves this, very nutritious. It's got all sorts of health benefits that Riley will speak about, but for wildlife, it's high in calories, it's high in carbohydrates, and these are things that everyone's trying to stock up on in the fall time as we're coming into winter.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of the medicinal benefits, because we're talking about harvesting some of them. And as you're doing this process of, you know, picking those berries off, you'll notice the tops of your fingers get a little purple. They get stained purple, which is kind of cool because what you're directly seeing is those flavonoid compounds. Every like purple or blue in nature is these flavonoid compounds, and that is what gives these berries that color. Flavonoids are some of the best antioxidants, and specifically elderberry has incredibly high levels of these flavonoids in the berries, especially compared to other wild berries. So that's one reason why it is, you know, revered as such a great medicinal plant, because flavonoids are also, you know, they're the best antioxidants, and especially as we get into the changes of the seasons, we're moving towards winter, where a lot of people get colds and flus and viral infections. And we have multiple studies showing that elderberries specifically, actually some elder flowers as well, some studies have shown elder flowers, can help reduce the duration of colds and flus. So in one placebo-controlled double-blind study using an elderberry extract, the researchers essentially found that in the group that had elderberry extract, their cold and flu symptoms were better and about 4 days shorter compared to the people who were not using any sort of elderberry extract. And less people actually suffered from symptoms of the cold and flu. So it can help shorten the duration of colds and flus and help lessen the symptoms from colds and flus.
Do we know what type of extract was used?
That's a good question. Yeah, it was a water extract, which is great question.
Oh, like a tea?
A tea.
Okay.
Or a syrup. I forget what they actually use.
Syrup's a water extract?
Yeah. Yep.
Cool.
Syrup's a water extract. So what we do when we make our syrups with elderberry, and that's typically what I make with elderberries, is you take as many elderberries as you have, and you typically do like a 1-to-2 ratio of however many elderberries you have to the amount of water. And then you're gonna create essentially a tea, but you really don't wanna get it to like a roaring boil, because flavonoids are heat sensitive, so you really don't wanna like, you know, heat them as long as you possibly can. Instead, you wanna almost like just steep it, like a below boiling temperature. And what I do is I take like a potato masher and I mash the berries to try to get all of those compounds out and into the water. I also add a variety of other medicinal plants. I add ginger, turmeric, clove, chaga, echinacea. I add a bunch of different things because I'm taking this as kind of like a preparation for cold and flu season. So pretty much anything that's good for your immune system, fighting off viruses, it can really benefit that whole change in your life.
Are you adding those? So you're making your syrup. You've got your elderberry. You've got your berries in your extract. It's coming to a boil. Is that when you're adding all those other medicinal plants?
After I smush it though, because it's really hard to smush the other things. Like you can't just smush a giant hunk of ginger.
Right.
Yeah. So instead I heat up the berries alone, smush them, then add in the other stuff, and then let it steep for a while.
Okay.
I haven't seen that in everyone's recipe either. I just kind of developed that as I started learning because I found like the color was much richer and what was left over from the extraction really just looked like casings of berries, which is what I was going for. It's like you really want to try to get as much as you can out of it. So that's kind of the method I've developed. I'll upload an entire like recipe of what I do on my Patreon page. But essentially what you need for like a bare minimum is your elderberries, your water, and you're probably gonna want some sort of sweetener like honey or agave or maple syrup or something because it can be a little bit bitter. Just a straight up elderberry can be a bit bitter.
So I know, again, that the full recipe will be on the Patreon, but as far as just like getting started, how many elderberries do you think someone should start with if they were gonna dive into this?
Oh yeah, I mean you don't need to collect pounds at first.
Right.
I would
we
just
have a tendency
we tend to go overboard on everything. You know, just collecting a few clusters could be a good starting point. Let's say 10 clusters of berries.
And
that'll
this,
get you.
this being a cluster.
Yeah, that being a cluster, that'll get you something about this size bowl filled with your berries. And you also, like, you don't need to make a syrup. You could just make a simple tea, too. You could also dehydrate your elderberries
right.
and then save them throughout the year and then keep them, like, in your tea space or wherever you keep all your tea stuff and then just sprinkle in some elderberries whenever you make tea and you'll still get those antioxidant, anti-inflammatory benefits. Also, you were talking about, you know, teas versus other consumption methods,
Right.
which I was saying is such a good question because there are some more fatty molecules in the berries that really didn't get a lot of research or love until the last few years, where researchers found that there's actually compounds, triterpenes, so a type of terpene, that are in the berries that have shown to be effective in preventing some cancer cell lines, like breast cancer and colon cancer cell lines, from growing or proliferating rapidly.
That's wicked cool.
Yeah, so if you did want to get all of the benefits from this plant, specifically from the berry, you may want to do a water extraction and an alcohol extraction.
Would you do that with the same berry, or would
See,
you
I don't think I would. No, I don't think I would. You could also use, you could also mix your water and alcohol together in like, I don't know, 75-25 ratio or something. And you could get all the benefits in one extraction. So you don't have to like remove something and try something else. Or you could do them in separate containers, one alcohol, one water, and then mix them. Oh, I do want to mention another study that I found really cool because you know how like everyone gets sick on airplanes, including me, including both of us, every time we travel? So one study actually looked at airline passengers that were traveling to or from Australia. And essentially there was about 300 participants and half of them had an elderberry syrup before they left and half of them didn't. And a larger proportion of people got sick who were not taking the elderberry syrup and they had less harsh of symptoms. The people who were taking the elderberry. So I think that's kind of cool because it's like applicable. And I feel like a lot of herbalists travel with some sort of like immunostimulating something, whether it's elderberry, chaga, echinacea, vitamin C, something in their bags.
So to that same point, you know, we're citing modern science, which we all know and love, but can you speak a bit to how this has been used through time by various cultures? And
it's been used literally forever by all cultures as like a heal-all. Like people have used it forever. Even the Romans used the berries to dye their hair.
So that also brings into its wide distribution.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're talking about black elderberry.
Yeah. Oh, good point.
So there's various different kinds of elderberry. So here in our ecotone, there's red elderberry and black elderberry.
And we're in, again, New England, northern New England.
Northern New England. And they both have a compound leaf. They both look very, very similar. Their final fruit clusters have the same structure. The biggest difference is that one is bright red, and we don't have them right now to show because they've gone past.
Yeah.
And these are obviously, this dark purple also can be.
The other ones have a smaller berry too, don't they? They're like a bit.
It is, and one of the most important things, because we don't want to be, my understanding is that there is medicinal benefits to red elderberry, but not nearly as what's been studied or traditionally used as black elderberry. And so
They also get people sick more than your black elderberry.
Exactly.
So this is Sambucus nigra. This is the one that we're looking for. This is black elderberry. So that's important to know, because even in like parts of the western U.S., they have even other varieties of elderberry that we're not familiar with at all, but I know that they exist.
So for the red versus black, though, the most distinguishable as far as harvesting them and using them for medicine, if it's fruiting in the spring or early summer, it's the red elderberry. It's the wrong elderberry. So you want the one that's fruiting in the fall. So red elderberry and black elderberry flower kind of similarly. Red's a bit earlier. Their flower comes right off the stalk, which is important because this one comes off the tip of the stem. So if it's coming right off the stalk, you know, you'd have a stem coming here, but right off the main stalk, that's red. If it's coming off the tip, that's black.
And the most important thing here is just knowing that there's different types that exist, so you can be aware and you can double check. Okay, I think I found elderberry. Check the leaf. It looks like the right kind of leaf. Check the actual color of it. Check when it's, you know, when it's ripe, when it's ready to harvest, and then you should be able to narrow it down pretty quickly from there.
So, sorry, I got sidetracked there.
Keep going.
Back to, you know, the different cultures who have used this and what they used it for.
Yeah, I mean, I think cultures like Native Americans, they used it for a variety of things, but also like as food. Like it's not just medicinal. People make wines and jams and jellies and preserves and all these different things from elderberry fruit because it's kind of this really unique flavor, and it's really the only thing that's super abundant right now as far as like, I guess cranberries are out.
Yeah, or wild cran are coming into
yeah.
it, or black cherries have gone by. It definitely is
it's a unique
time period.
Yeah.
It's kind of on the earlier side of when, you know, your blackberries have gone by, your apples aren't quite there. We're talking about more wild apples. And so, yeah, it fills a niche. It fills a niche for those who were living off of what was available during different time frames.
I think that one of the reasons people have been taking this forever as they go into the winter and fall is really the vitamin content in these berries too. They're not only rich in the flavonoids that again are a great anti-inflammatory and a great antioxidant, but they're rich in vitamin A and vitamin C. And I think we all kind of know as you kind of get into the winter, you tend to eat more vitamin C, whether it's your Florida navel oranges or whatever it is. You're kind of craving those vitamins in your life. And these are an excellent source of those and can definitely make you more resilient to conditions like upper respiratory viruses or bacterial infections or colds and flus. This is just something that is unnecessarily complicated, like all the time. And that's when you read about the benefits of elderberry, you're going to read that it has anthocyanins in it. You're going to read that it has polyphenols in it. You're going to read that it has flavonoids in it. And I just want people to know that these are essentially the same thing. So like flavonoids are a type, or anthocyanins are a type of flavonoid that is water soluble. And polyphenol literally just means that it has multiple phenol groups in it, which is many of these flavonoids and anthocyanins. So these aren't all like separate things that you're reading about. It's actually just different ways of saying the same exact thing. But what's important here is when you look at a molecular structure, and I know this is something people hate doing, but when you look at a molecular structure for something like vitamin A or vitamin C, and you see a lot of double bonds in that structure, those are typically good antioxidants. Because the point of an antioxidant is to scavenge free radicals. So free radicals do damage in your body, right? It's a single electron that can just like react with anything in your body, which you don't want because it's causing reactions.
Chaotic.
It's causing damage. Yeah, it's chaotic. Whereas these molecules with a lot of these double bonds and these conjugated double bonds, they're just in this pattern of double bond, single bond, double bond, single bond. Those make great antioxidants because they're electron rich. Those double bonds are just a bunch of electrons. So when you have a free radical that has this lone electron, you need something with a lot of electrons for it to pair up with. And that's molecules that have a lot of double bonds, like vitamin C, vitamin A, quercetin, which is, it's a very, very common antioxidant. It's actually very abundant in elderberries and in a lot of fruits and natural products. So I'm just kind of giving a little side note of like looking at a molecular structure, how you could possibly know if it was a good antioxidant or not.
So to that same tune, is there anything to be concerned about with elderberry? Like I've read that you don't want to consume a lot of it raw.
Yes. The berries specifically. It can give people stomach aches if you do eat a lot of the berries raw, which is, yeah, very important because they do look kind of delicious and you can eat a couple. Like we've eaten a couple. Yeah. But you really do want to either create something like a syrup or a tea where or jam, you're introducing heat to it. But it could also come from just like residual amounts of these little like twigs and stuff, potentially. And then the heat can inactivate that and make it safer to eat. So I don't know.
What are there's some other fruits or vegetables that you're not supposed to?
Cherries have cyanide in them. Yeah.
Right.
But this is specifically, it's not straight up cyanide that's in the leaves and the bark. It's a cyanogenic glycoside. So what that means is cyanide is like a functional group essentially. So it's C triple bonded to N. That's cyanide, okay? So this molecule has a lot of other components to it. It's not just that. But if you introduce a specific enzyme, like if you're fermenting or processing it in some way, it's going to break off that cyanide group from the rest of the molecule, and that's where it could get potentially harmful. So you might have those enzymes in your body as well, which is like why if you do eat these leaves, you might be processing it into cyanide. I'm not an expert in that. I just know that I avoid the leaves for that reason. But again, back to like Native Americans and these other cultures who have used this plant, they're not letting anything go to waste, right? So they use these leaves as a poultice, which is you like essentially crush up the leaves and you can put it on your skin. And that can help with bruising and inflammation on your skin.
Oh, interesting.
And in that case, it's a lot safer because you're not ingesting the leaves. So
What amazes me is that all these wildlife species can consume it with little to no side effects, you know.
You never see wildlife eating leaves either.
Well, in the spring, elderberries are one of the first things to leaf out. And so it's your ruminants, your deer and your moose and some other areas, your elk are eating a ton of the buds. Granted, it's not a fully developed leaf, so I don't know what's going on with those compounds.
Well, I know the compounds drastically change as the plant goes through maturity too. So maybe the animals know something I don't know. And
and that's also, we're talking about ruminants, and so they process things very, very differently. You know, they have a four-chambered stomach.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is what, in the springtime here in New England, our moose are in a bit of a tough spot with winter ticks and with health. And so these things that bud out early that have nutrition in them are vitally important. And so they will seek out elderberry. Again, you're often finding them in those abandoned beaver ponds. Red elderberry also leaves out earlier, and that's kind of a more mid-elevation, drier soil community type. And so it'll be interesting though. I mean, you will see these plants that are just starting to bud out, and you're like, oh man, spring's finally coming. And then you pass the same one the next day and all the buds are gone.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
So yeah, but again, we don't know, I don't know what exactly is happening inside a ruminant compared to...
You know what a little life hack is that I forgot to like write down in these show notes, but I think it's kind of cool that I did last year? Wait, that was this year. Okay, anyway. What I started doing with the elderberry syrup, because I would like bottle it up and I'd keep it in the fridge, and it's nice to use, but sometimes it can be a bit messy or whatever. What I started to do was I make the syrup and then I freeze it in ice cube trays. So then if you have like a hot tea that you just made, you put a ice cube of the elderberry syrup in your tea, then it cools your tea and introduces this awesome benefit as well.
We did a ton of that this past winter.
Oh my gosh. And then we were having just like iced tea with it, or just like water with some elderberry syrup, ice cubes. So I'm definitely going to keep doing that. That was
freezing water extracts in ice cube trays has been
I know.
has been a pretty popular thing for you recently.
Yeah, I have a lot of ice cube trays full of random stuff in the freezer right now. But I mean, what else can we mention as far as like lowering, like how can we help people find elderberry a bit more? Is there anything else we can help them with?
I mean, the biggest things in finding elderberry, again, keying into the white flowers in that late June, early July time period, doing some quick research around you. When does elderberry flower around me? There's going to be a ton of information on the internet because this is something that's been used by so many people. You know, it's popular. But finding those white flowers, then taking your GPS points and then checking in on them through the fall time period. So the easy route is just keep your eyes out on the edge of the roadsides, especially in wet depressions on the edge of the roadsides during that early summer, late spring time period. If you really want to go for the kind of more, remote approach to foraging, and we'll often pair looking for elderberries with mushroom hunting because a lot of mushrooms are coming out in the fall.
We literally did that today.
And that's what spurred this conversation. And so we'll go, we'll say, okay, we'd like to check these specific community types, maybe a northern hardwood slope for bear's head tooth or something. And so we'll take a route that brings us through some abandoned beaver ponds. And again, getting more to the technical side of things. So we're using aerial photography and topographic maps paired together. And so you're looking for depressions, and there's all sorts of mapping services now. I mean, Google Earth can do a ton, or just Google Maps can do a ton. But looking for beaver ponds that have been abandoned 3 to 6 years prior, and that's
super specific.
I know it's highly specific.
I don't know if that's really helpful.
But hear me out.
Okay.
Hear me out. So you're going to be looking for, on these maps, you're going to be looking for things that had water in them, right? These beaver ponds, and you can see these receding beaver ponds through Google Images. And if you look at the date at which the imagery was taken, okay, this imagery was taken in 2020, and it's 2023, and that beaver pond already was appearing to recede. So you can see just a little bit of water left in a depression. The tree line is twice the size of where the water is. That area between the water and the tree line is that sedge, grass, meadow type, receding water, super rich soil following a disturbance. And so again, if you're looking for, I know I'm getting highly technical, but
it is technical, and I think that's great for people who are comfortable outside and like know how to look for these things. But even like simplifying it even more, like so we said like wet ground, right? So you might immediately say, okay, that's streams, ponds, rivers, that kind of thing, right?
Right.
So then the next thing is some sort of opening as well, because
they need
a lot of sun. Yep. So if you have just this little dinky river that's running through the woods and it's wet, sure, that's great, check, you have that first thing, but it's not open. So all your trees are going to be inhibiting the elderberries from growing. So maybe just walk along that little stream for a while and see if it opens up into something eventually, into something with more sun. And that might be an area that you might find some elderberry, is you have the wetness from that stream or that river, and then you're just kind of waiting for the right amount of sunlight and openness in order to find it.
We've also had a lot of success finding them on the edges of ponds.
Yes.
Taking the canoe out in the fall, which is a beautiful time to be out on the water and paddling those kind of softer edges, not the hard rocky edges, but that where it kind of transitions lightly into, again, that more kind of meadowy type complex.
Yeah. And if you are scouting for elderflowers, which is the flower of the elderberry, in spring, you can also harvest the elderflower and actually get almost all the benefits that you get from the berries, except you have less flavonoid content because these are giant purple berries that are just full of flavonoids. But you still get a lot of the other benefits of this plant from just the flowers. But just something to be aware of, when you harvest those elderflowers, they're not going to turn into berries. So don't go to a plant, harvest all your elderflowers, go to use them at home and then expect to come back later in the fall and also find the elderberries, because you just took the precursor to the berry.
So when you're making something out of elderflower, are you still making a syrup?
So most people make a tea out of it.
A tea. And do you still have to pick that flower off?
Yeah, you still have to pick it.
Okay,
but it's kind of like picking chamomile, where you kind of just like push down on it and it'll like separate. It's not like the elderberry where you're kind of rolling it. You kind of just need to like pick it off. You still don't want to consume a lot of the stem. We don't harvest a lot of elderflower because we want them to turn into berries for us and the birds and the rest of the wildlife.
On the wildlife side of things, those flowers are vitally important for a whole variety of pollinators. Not to say that you can't harvest some. I mean, that's the beauty of these elderberry plants, is they produce...
Oh, they get huge.
I mean, thousands and
huge,
thousands of flowers and thousands of berries.
So you could take a couple of them, bring them home, dry them, and then make a tea with them. That's fine. I'm mostly talking about like wreaking havoc on a plant and trying to collect every flower.
And so, you know, they're great for pollinators, and then you have all sorts of other birds that may be gleaning those pollinators. And then furthermore, the branching structure is really specific for nesting for very, specific types of songbirds. And so it's one of those plants that serves a wildlife purpose from, again, first thing to green up, so you have nutrition that's getting on the landscape, all the way down to the fall time period where they're providing berries. So it's a fascinating plant from a wildlife perspective, but it's also got these medicinal purposes, which are, just really cool.
It is really cool. And I think, I might be wrong here, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think the flowers have higher levels of the triterpenoid compounds too. So you could also make a tincture just as easy if you wanted to. And another just cool thing about this plant is both the berries and the flowers have they have a lot of uses beyond what we're kind of talking about here. They're used in industries like as a safe dye for medicines and for products because they're so rich in color. So they're really good as just a natural dye. I mentioned the Romans, dyed their hair with it. It's I've experimented with dyeing cloth with it. So it's a really beautiful dye. And the flowers too, you might find elderflower syrups in places that are used in alcohol making and ciders and these other kind of unique flavors, because the smell and the taste of elderflower is really unique. It's sweet, but it's also a bit like musky, kind of like this really diverse, unique smell. So it's a cool flavor.
And more cool elderberry facts, the stem, as they get larger, as these plants get larger, the stems become hollow. And so again, thinking back to a time period where humans were living here without all the modern amenities that we have, whether it be a straw or another instrument that you need to have hollow for moving water from one thing to another. So it's a really cool plant for a bunch of different reasons.
And something we love is, we forage throughout the year, and elderberry is definitely one of those staple plants that tells us that fall is here.
Yeah, it's part of our cycle.
It's a transition plant for us, so it's really special, and we wanted to talk about it because we kind of have these like fiddleheads and morels are our spring thing. That is so exciting to collect those, and for now it's elderberries and mushrooms like barehead tooth, lion's mane. And actually the woods are just popping with mushrooms right now. So it's a really, really cool time to be outside. It's still super hot during the day and cools off at night.
It just dawned on me that we have a full plant here, so you could show, granted for the audio listeners they won't be able to see, but you can describe and you can show those who are watching on YouTube or these other platforms exactly how to harvest this. It is super simple, but hey, we're here.
Oh, you mean cutting the top off and stuff?
Yeah, and where you cut it in comparison to
sure. Absolutely.
So we just use,
we usually have clippers with us, but sometimes both of us keep emergency clippers in our car because we're just always finding something. But so these are the kind of not dried, but wilty leaves. Here's the actual berry stalk. I'd say you can comfortably cut anywhere from here to here, but since we're really only using the berries, we kind of try to go towards the top here. And then this is where you would just start rolling between your fingers, and you can notice them kind of just dropping.
Which is what I was doing for...
Yeah, he's almost done with all of this. This is the last one.
Most of the podcast here.
Yeah, and it really is mindless, and it can be pretty relaxing too.
That's the beauty of this activity, is you can come home at the end of the day and you can just roll berries and
But
chat.
we've also been in the situation where we've been really busy, and then we would harvest like 10 pounds of elderberries, and we're like, what are we doing?
I remember one time we were
At your parents'
we
house?
were leaving. It was my birthday weekend, which is in the end of August, and so we often are down seeing my parents. And there's this one elderberry patch that we always try to pick, and we had been so busy that fall that we missed the majority of elderberry season. We hadn't picked any, and we were coming north, and we see our elderberry plant, and there was only like 20 bunches left, and the birds had picked over the majority of them. And we wheeled off the road real quick and jumped out with, again, just my Leatherman that I had on me, and we picked a bunch of berries. But we had something or whatever it was, we had some reason that we weren't gonna have time, and we got back. So Riley spent that ride north rolling elderberries in the vehicle to get ahead of it. And so
It worked. Yeah.
we have a tendency to overpick things.
But it really is a good beginner medicinal plant to identify, to harvest. It's in a lot of super busy areas.
Yeah.
Like I even remember when I went to like Paris with my grandmother, like I saw elderberry like all around France. Like it is everywhere. And you really, once you have that search image, once you've found like Sambucus nigra, like this black elderberry, you're gonna be able to find it again.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a really good one to start on.
Unique
it's
leaves,
fun.
it's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super abundant and it's delicious. Like the syrup's delicious, it feels medicinal, and it's a good staple for when the seasons change.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Hey, thanks for coming. I think you'll be on again soon. Maybe we'll do one on bear's head tooth because we had so much fun collecting that today.
We found some good bear's head tooth today.
And just, if we do this, so in the future, Hericium species of fungi are your lion's mane, your bear head's tooth. And then there's also one, actually we found today, I believe it's called Hericium coralis, something. It looks like a coral. So we have found all the species, I think, that are local to us. So that was really cool. And there's a lot of medicinal benefits to that fungi. So
We're coming into foraging and harvest season here as the fall is on top of us now.
cool. This was a fun episode too.
Yeah, I
Cool
enjoyed it.
change of pace. And I was gonna do a full episode introducing you first before this kind of stuff, but this is Jake. So
Here I am.
so we'll just do a future episode, a little more about some cool research you've done with some wildlife, and kind of just talking more about how our lives collide into this dope world we live in.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
Cool. We'll catch you not next week. I'm taking a week off because this is the end of season 1, and then we'll be back in 2 weeks for the first episode of season 2.
Hey, congratulations on your first season of Bioactive. It's been awesome.
Thanks. It's been a bit stressful, but I've had a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, I know I've enjoyed it. I think most people have.
Cool. Yeah, I'm really liking it. Cool.